Arrakis is utterly unforgiving. That was one of the main conclusions I've drawn after spending the past 2 weeks exploring the vastness of Dune Awakening's first maps, which at the end of the day only amount to a fraction of what the game has to offer, as the preview build we got access to was mostly restricted to the first 40 levels. Even so, I've got a much better understanding of what this game is and how it plays, so today I'll be sharing with you guys a lot of the biggest features and early impressions ahead of the June 10 release. I've also got to give my thanks to Funcom for providing early access to the game as well as for sponsoring today's video. They were also super kind and hooked me up with 20 keys for the beta weekend starting May 9th that I'm going to give away to you guys. Just make sure that you leave a comment below, like the video and subscribe to the channel. On May 9th, there's going to be a huge beta weekend for Dune Awakening that you can also register by following the links down below, which lists the game on Steam, and also check the official live streams on May 10, on top of the 20 keys that I'm also giving away on the channel around the same time. That being said, my decisions were meaningful all the way from the character creation screen. Besides the rather extensive list of customization options, I could also pick my background, and a lot of this will influence stuff like having extra dialogues, lore context, or even different emotes depending on your place of origin. However, the most important was the class selection screen that you can already have the option for right here. You get to choose between 4 of the 5 existing starting classes: Swordmaster, Acolyte, Mentat, and the Trooper. However, there's also the Planetologist that you can further unlock early on. And the thing about this is that every single one of them will start you with that class and provide one starting ability. However, at no point are you locked just in that class. In fact, 2 of the trainers that unlock 2 other classes can be encountered literally on the very first map. So eventually you can unlock every single of the 5 skill trees in the game and get all of the bonuses over there, and I will cover more about the skill trees a little bit later in the video. But the moment I got out of the prologue, it immediately became obvious that Arrakis is not a place for the weak. Resource management, resource collection, and keeping your hydration levels up are the key to your survival early on. This is a survival game first and foremost, and the gameplay loop early on consists of mainly trying to stay alive while collecting as many plant fibers, granite, and copper ore as you can, so you can then funnel that into your starting base building and the early technologies that protect you from the harsh environment. And one aspect I found equally as interesting as it was unsettling but still very lore accurate was the process of getting more water, because in this game a lot of it comes out of your enemies, their blood to be more precise. And you've got entire tools of extracting, storing, and distilling the blood of your enemies to turn that into literally usable water. Not just for hydration, but also used in crafting some of the more advanced metals that you need later on. So pretty metal, I'm not gonna lie, this pretty much gives you an idea of what life in the deserts of Arrakis looks like. But in the build we got to play, we've only got access to Haga Basin South, basically the first 2 maps, and looking at the whole region, they barely even covered a fraction of what Haga Basin will be in the full game, yet the maps felt so large. And the way that you reveal more of these maps is using a probe launcher that you can craft early on from a high enough vantage point, which then scans the whole region to reveal the whole area to you. And I guess it makes sense for the maps to be this big because later on you'll get access to your own craftable vehicles. And let me tell you, there's no better feeling than the first time you get to craft your very own sand bike. Luckily, it doesn't take too long, but it's such a game changer now that you don't have to traverse the desert on foot anymore. You can even install extra upgrades for it as you unlock them, such as speed boosters or inventory slots. I'm telling you, the game does a great job at introducing these to you progressively exactly when you need them the most. And that's just for the bike. We got 3 other vehicles later down the line, including the Ornithopter, which is basically a flying vehicle. There are even versions of these that I've seen that are either more aimed towards exploration, while others are more aimed for combat with rocket launcher installs and whatnot, since obviously this game also includes PvP, at least at the higher levels. So you're going to progressively unlock better versions of these that can resist the environments much better, because guess what? Your vehicles can degrade over time, both as you continuously use them, but also if you leave them out in the open world unsheltered. Luckily, there are tools in the game to store these in your backup tool so that you avoid having to place them anywhere physically, and this means you can both summon and unsummon them wherever you want, as long as it's outside. And generally, the open world does a great job at constantly keeping you in that sense of danger. Heat strokes can quickly eat through your hydration levels, so you've got to make the most out of the shade you find. If you linger in the open desert for too long or cause enough vibrations, it won't take too long until a sandworm will actually get alerted, and they really did a great job at balancing this. So you've got a bit of time before the worm chases you. First, you'll see the vibration levels going too high, and then the worm will first emerge from the ground somewhere in your vicinity. And from that point on, you've got about 10 seconds or so, or the equivalent of about a kilometer if you move fast enough, before you're basically toast. Early on, even with your sand bike, that won't be enough to outrun it, because that thing is absolutely massive. And let me tell you, it will gulp everything down. Just to give you an example, and unfortunately I don't think I have the footage any longer, but at one point I saw a ship being blown out of the sky and falling into the nearby desert. So obviously I was curious and I went ahead and investigated, because I thought I would be getting some extra loot. But without realizing, the worm was literally inches away, and the moment I got there, it immediately ate the entire ship and also got my bike in the process. Almost got my character as well, which would have made me permanently lose many of the resources that I had upon me. But that was just a scenario that happened randomly, and it was so real as it was interesting. Like, the moment I saw that happening, I knew that this would be a very special kind of game. But discovering, unlocking the map, and going through all the dangers is just one of the things. Of course, have many others. There are bandits with bandit camps all around the place. There's patrol ships. So just to give you an example, especially during nighttime, you're going to see many of these patrol ships between desert regions, and I'm gonna try to show you what this one does. So if you get caught in its light, you're going to immediately get trapped in some kind of anti-gravity field, which will hold you down in place, because the next thing that happens is that they will send in a number of troops against you. Now, for me right now, since this is a level 40 character or so, it's very easy to deal with them. I'm pretty much going to one-shot them anyway. But early on, when I got caught for the first time, they absolutely blasted me. Again, one of those experiences that just happen when you roam the desert. It's just one of the things. But besides these, you also have outposts, test facilities, also some of these ship wreckage that you can find. There were two of them, and they are very special because you can find some important resources that you can use to craft some of the better armor and weapons in the game, such as the microfibers and mechanical parts. We saw a wreck of the Alcyon, and there was another one up north, both of which were important for some of the better armors, but I'm going to assume the same will continue to carry in the later stages. Another one that was even more interesting were these Imperial testing stations, of which we've seen two of, number 2 and number 10. So the first one, number 2, was on the smaller scale, but still very packed with enemies. These are very useful because you get a lot of particle capacitors and other important resources that you need to craft vehicles. However, the number 10 one, the one a bit up north in the second region, that was absolutely crazy. It took me like 45 minutes to fully complete that, and I believe it had like 2 or 3 batches of full back-to-back bosses, and one of them was multi-boss, and it was quite challenging, I'm not going to lie, though I could have maybe had better loot when I got to jump into that fight. So admittedly, I could have been way better equipped for it, since it was obviously the big fight I had over there. And they were not the only ones. There are many outposts, bandit caves, and even like entire bandit run facilities. I'm talking about like huge factories transformed into basically outposts that you can go ahead and raid. And the best part about this is that you constantly get some of the best rewards from them, resources, even items, and especially so even intel, like I said, that you can funnel into unlocking other technologies. On top of the fact that they also seem to respawn rather quickly in the build we played. Likely that's going to be slightly tuned down when the full game releases, but for now, both resources as well as the outposts were refreshing really quickly. I'm talking about like the biggest outpost was refreshing every 45 in-game minutes. And like I said, you do need to get better loot to fare better against some of these tougher challenges. And one thing that's really interesting is that besides the normal loot you have, you also have special uniques that you can see right here into their own category, and you need to find their schematics in the open world. Now, many of the schematics I found were either from the main story, but especially from some of the testing facilities and other major outposts I talked about, especially towards the end of them. And some of them over here are very strong, providing some very unique effects. For example, Wings of the Emperor, which I got very early from one of the outposts, basically gives you levitation if you craft that, so you can now use your jump button, hold it pressed, and for as long as you have stamina, you're going to float into the air, which couples very well, for example, with the grappling hook from the trooper skill line that essentially lets you grapple onto almost anything. So in this case, you can launch yourself pretty much over the mountain if you know what you're doing. But besides that, there are many others. I found a schematic for a knife that also immediately draws blood straight into my blood packs without having to use the extractor in the first place. So really awesome details, and there are many others with even more unique effects, especially when it comes to weapons. You're going to find some that are going to be very, very strong. This also brings us to base building, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I suck at base building, so it's better if I show you some of the better creations that other players have made in this game. Huge shout out to all of the players that made these bases, obviously, but you can definitely create some very interesting layouts, and a lot of them will have both form as well as function. So you have a lot of options in terms of the parts you can pick. You can pick even more parts later down the line that you can both unlock with the intel, but also purchase schematics from various vendors to get extra decorations and other stuff you can place inside of the base. But inside of them, the technologies will also be important. You have generators that you need to power up with fuel cells, which will give power to your entire base. Eventually, you're going to get other technologies like blood purifiers, because you need a lot of water over here, which you eventually can funnel into some of the ore processing units that you get to unlock. Besides this, you're going to eventually also unlock various fabricators, both for regular items, for armor, but also for vehicles. So better and better options will eventually unlock as you progress, level up, and gain more intel. You also get item repair units and recyclers. Basically, let's say you find items in the open world or in a chest, but that item is damaged. However, instead of having to craft an equivalent for it, you can go ahead and repair that instead of wasting resources to fully build it from the get-go. But you can also deconstruct it at a recycler, get the basic materials out of it, and then funnel those into something else. There's a whole process over here to create a whole industry, and that is just basically the beginning. You have so many other options later down the line that will unlock. So no doubt, base building right now feels robust, seems very good, has a lot of options, and you're likely not going to get bored of it anytime soon. Now, in terms of skill trees, there were 5 of them that I saw besides the 4 different classes. At the character creation, there was also that planetologist that you can unlock early from a skill NPC. And the last one was basically dealing with planet-related abilities. So some anti-gravity abilities there too. But in terms of the passives, also ones that would boost my rate of acquiring resources, especially from mining. Those were very, very good. But in terms of the skills, we normally have 2, but I'm gonna say there's actually 3. So we have the active abilities. We have 3 slots that we can unlock as we progress in the game. These are your active turrets, for example, poison darts, various grenades, also the grappling hook from early on, and many others, pretty much what you can activate with your buttons. Then we have the techniques, also 3 slots over here. These are the major passive perks. So for example, I slotted in some that can increase my damage to a weak point, such as the head, also reducing my cooldown abilities, and another one that deals more damage to the body, but you can obviously see them here by their enlarged icons. And besides this, there's also the smaller nodes, which are also passive, but they pretty much apply to your entire character regardless if you slot them in or not. You can't even like move or slot them, so they will always be active once you invest points in them. The only other aspect I haven't covered is in terms of the story. Now, I'm not gonna like spoil anything about the story. I will instead talk a bit more about contracts and side missions. So every now and then you're going to go to these major livable outposts, such as, for example, the Griffin outpost in the first map, but pretty much every map has one of these spots where you will find a bunch of merchants, quest givers, and you can also pick contracts from the contract board right here. And let me tell you, these contracts were almost always worth it. Some of them are very quick, just bring in a bunch of resources or take care of some targets somewhere, and you can get some really good rewards, XP, money, and sometimes some very useful schematics or even usable items. But other contracts come in the form of chain quests. You will be notified if one is as such right here from the main UI screen, but basically if you fully finish that chain, you can get some very strong rewards. For example, in the case of the bike I was talking about, the desert bike, I got 2 MK2 upgrades for that bike upon finishing one of the starting contracts in the Griffin outpost. So in this case, both one of those speeder units, but also an extra inventory slot I could place on it, both of which were MK2, so that meant I unlocked those versions way sooner than I would have if I were to unlock them with Intel the regular way, and it was also free. I didn't have to craft them, I was able to just apply them right away. And besides this, many of these contracts, if you finish them, let's say in the middle of the field, let's say you took down an assassination, you don't need to go back to the contract board. You can just contact your, well, contact or whoever issued that contract for you in the first place right from the middle of the field, give that in, and you're going to get all of those resources right there without having to visit the base. So even though this is a survival game, it still has a decent amount of quality of life in it. Maybe the only downside I would say is in regards to the base building. It kind of felt a little bit that you were wasting bases because you have to be very deliberate where you place them. So for example, if you place them in the very beginning of the map, but then the story brings you to the opposite side, it's going to take a long time to reach that place, especially without a vehicle. So it kind of felt that initially I had to wait a little bit before I crafted the base, or I had to deconstruct them often to move them to a new location. Hopefully in the future there's going to be fast traveling to some of these bases so that you can at least save some of the time, at least up until you get the ornithopter. I think that that's going to make things a lot easier, but that comes in much later. Anyway, that is pretty much it in terms of some of the major things you should know about Dune Awakening. Let me know down below in the comments if you have any other questions. Of course, more coverage will follow soon with all of the other stuff that I've also discovered and going into even more details ahead of the June 10 release day. And by the way, once again, shout out to Funcom for sponsoring today's video. Also check out the game using the links down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.